A couple of years ago, I had a researcher with the United States Institute of Peace contact me wanting to tell a story. And he started with the notion that he was in Afghanistan doing some peace work out there. And while he was in Afghanistan, it was during the time where, I don't know if you remember, but there was a preacher in Florida who was burning the Quran. And every time that happened, he would notice that there was an increase in attacks against U.S. military and nonprofit volunteers that were stationed there. In an effort to prevent, mitigate, and resolve these attacks, the researcher went to the village imam and asked if they could work together to facilitate conversations and explore how they might be able to bridge the divides that this radical preacher was creating in the community, and around the world, actually, for that matter. Without hesitation, the imam said, absolutely. And the reason that he gave was because he was a participant in a U.S. State Department international exchange program. And he specifically mentioned Utah as one of the locations that he visited while he was here. He said that while he was in Utah, he met with people who were curious, warm, welcoming, and the imam said because of his experience in Utah, he knew who real Americans were. I share that because the video mentions that we build global connections and global bridges through citizen diplomacy. And that's the concept that we all shape foreign relations, and we do it as simply as one handshake at a time. So what that means is when we sit down together and we talk to one another and we share ideas and we ask each other, how do we make the world a better place for everyone? That is where we find the common ground where we can coexist. Utah Global Diplomacy and Bellwether International have spent months on this event. In fact, Chris Piper and I, hi Chris, had a conversation back in September, and we said, how do we talk about religion in Utah? So in finding just the right speakers and curating just the right experience for you today, I know that it's going to have an immeasurable ripple effect. But remember that bridging religious divides takes more than just a one-time engagement. And that is why our work at building bridges is so critical in making the world more peaceful and prosperous. We have a very dear friend of our organization. His name is Justin Powell. He's the executive director of a local nonprofit called YouthLink. And I think he summed up what we do at Utah Global Diplomacy so perfect. He said that we are like the knot tree in the book To Kill a Mockingbird. Just as the knot tree functions as the gateway in which Boo Radley observes and connects with the world outside of his house, we are that gateway for people here in Utah to observe and connect with the world around us. And that, to me, I nerd out about this kind of stuff. I think that is so exciting that we can connect with the world right here in Utah. So I'm glad that you're here today. I want to thank you again for spending your time with us. I know that it's incredibly valuable, but I hope you do leave with some exciting takebacks. With that, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. This morning, you were asked to scan a QR code. It just helps us identify who our audience is so we know how to better tailor these events to the people that we're talking to. And then this afternoon, after the final panel discussion, we're going to put up another QR code. That's the event evaluation, and we would love to hear your feedback. We want to make sure that we do a good job. I'm also not one to work beyond bribery, and so if you do stay till the very end and scan the QR code and finish the evaluation, you can win fabulous prizes like a night stay here at Little America, dinners at their buffet, doTERRA gifts, and so please stay till the very end because there's a good chance that you may win. Additionally, Oh, at lunch, there's also another fun game that we're going to play, so definitely stick around with lunch. Speaking of lunch, it is going to be a working lunch, so we don't have anything planned other than during that time, we are going to put questions and papers and pens and markers on the table, and we want you to have some conversations about what does religious freedom look like in Utah, around the world, and across the United States. So at the end of lunch, then we're just going to have a quick little report out. I would love to hear what it is that you're saying. I'm sure our experts are also going to be curious about what it is that you're saying so that we know how to better connect. Finally, I want to just take this moment to give my sincere gratitude to our guest speakers. They're generously giving their time and their knowledge today. We've got an incredible lineup of experts that are going to speak. And then I do want to thank our symposium sponsors. So thank you to the Sterling Foundation, Global Ties US, Utah Humanities, the National Endowment for the Humanities, in which the symposium is funded in part by the United We Stand Connecting Through Cultures initiative, Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Park, the Ambassador Price and Marcia Price Family Foundation, World Affair Councils of America, doTERRA, and Little America. But I want to give a special recognition to our symposium naming sponsor and planning partner, Bellwether International. When I was talking with Chris and other people in the community about who is leading the conversation about religious freedom here in Utah and around the world, there was one name that continually came up, and that was Rachel Miner. And it only took one meeting with her to figure out that she is a force and she is going to do incredible things, has already done incredible things throughout the world. Her thoughtfulness, her respect, and methodical approach to the topic of religious freedom in Utah and across the United States and around the world makes her the perfect person to lead today's conversation. Rachel, I just want to say thank you for spending your time and your knowledge, your connections, and your treasures with us to make today's event happen. With that, please join me in welcoming Rachel Miner, founder and CEO of Bellwether International.
What a kind introduction. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited to see old friends, new friends, and to tell you a little bit about the journey that we're going to go on today, a journey that hopefully will inspire you to action, because a good conference is more than just talking. A good conference will inspire you to make changes in your life and to make changes here in Utah and wherever you have a sphere of influence. So let's talk a little bit about why we are here. We are here to talk about a very important issue, and that is freedom of religion or belief, a human right that many of you know because of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, but one that will become increasingly more important as we go through our conference today. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Bellwether International, and particularly that word, bellwether. What does it mean to be a bellwether? Well, in ancient times, the sheep herders knew that the larger their herd, the more they would need a leader that could go out in the front and lead the way. So one sheep was chosen and would have a bell tied around its neck so that it would ring, and the rest of the sheep would know where to follow. So to be a bellwether means to be a leader or an indicator of trends, to be out in the front, guiding the way so others know where to follow. And our mission at Bellwether International is to be that leader in the human rights space, particularly looking and thinking about creating genocide-resistant societies. Why genocide? Well, if we don't protect religious freedom, it is a matter of life or death for most people in the world. And certainly where we sit here in Utah and in the United States, we have enormous blessings, enormous safety. But part of what we hope to accomplish today is to help you connect to people outside of Utah, outside of the United States, and think a little bit about how important freedom of religion or belief is as a bellwether human right. So next, bridging the religious divide. Felicia's already touched on this, but I did a little research. I'm not an engineer, I'm an economist, and so I wanted to know how do we build bridges? Particularly, I was interested in the Golden Gate Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, these massive structures that span 3,000 feet or more across enormous divides. How do we build these bridges? So here's your little engineering 101 lesson of the day. The first step is site inspection and planning. Makes sense? So I thought we would do a little site inspection. Let's get a sense of who's in the room and what we're working with here today. So just by raise of hand, raise your hand if this is your first Religious Freedom Conference. Awesome. Okay, welcome. Thank you for being here. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Wow, incredible. So we have a really robust group, first Religious Freedom Conference, but it looks like we're automatically unified on an understanding of human rights and what they do for us. So after site inspection and planning, the second thing that you do to build a bridge is set the foundation. And our foundation today is Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which outlines that freedom of religion or belief is a human right for all people everywhere. And the Universal Declaration was written at a very critical time in history, 1948. Any big events following the years 1948? The world had just experienced the worst genocide of all time. And people were thinking about the consequences of genocide. And as a result of that, they were thinking about religion, and they were thinking about religious freedom. And a delegation led by Eleanor Roosevelt from the United States gathered to pen and draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That is our foundation today, and what we'll be bridging or building our bridges on. Okay, the third step is you put in piers and bridge support. So imagine the divide in San Francisco of the Golden Gate Bridge. They put in initial columns and supports. Well, those are our speakers today. They are going to be the piers that you can build your bridges on. They have expertise in every area. We have interfaith leaders, religious leaders, international business people, human rights defenders, State Department leaders. We have people from across the globe that are going to provide those piers and supports as we build our bridges. Fourth, after we have the piers and supports, we add the superstructure. Didn't really know what that meant, but it's the initial beams that they put down across the piers to start building the bridge. What is our superstructure? That is the norms that we're going to put in place. So I just want to put down some initial norms for everyone here. When you build a bridge, you have to suspend things. You have to hold things in suspension. And one of the norms I want to set for today is that you're going to have to suspend some of your own assumptions, some of your own biases, and some of your own beliefs. Not permanently, but long enough to entertain new ideas, connect with people who believe differently than you, and long enough to create a space where we can compromise, not to actually decrease our liberty, but compromise to promote and expand the liberty of our communities and the greater good. Is everyone willing to put some suspension in their bridges today? I know I certainly am. So that's the main norm. The second norm is that I want you to meet someone that you don't know. Simple invitation, but critical to what we're trying to do. So our superstructure is suspending assumptions and biases and meeting someone who believes differently than you. And finally, the last step, once the bridge has been built, is a final quality and safety inspection. I struggled a little bit trying to figure out what the application might be for our conference today, considering we're not doing any safety checks. But I've decided that our safety check for this conference is what happens after. What happens when you leave this conference room? What we'll be inspecting is who we become. And hopefully we give you an experience that helps you to become something. So my last call to action is that you tag, follow, share, hashtag, whatever platform appeals to you. Please share what you're learning today. And if you're not on social media, that's fine. We support you. Send a text to someone in your life or a little voice message. During the break, give a phone call to someone you love or someone who might benefit from what we're saying. And that's how we'll have our final quality check. So lastly, there are many things that divide us. That goes without saying. But today, we're bridge builders. Today, every one of you gets to be a bellwether in your own life, in the state of Utah, in the United States and frankly in the world. The fact that we're having this conversation means you're out in the front leading the way. So without further ado, let me turn the time over now to one of the great bridge builders in the religious freedom movement, Nadine Maenza. Nadine has an impressive history, but most important is a kind woman of action, leadership, and example. Few know and have invested in international religious freedom as much as Nadine Maenza has. She's especially worked in Syria and Iraq. She spends about 1 month living in each country every year. Nadine currently serves as the president of the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, a group that is dedicated to building religious freedom globally and convening religious freedom roundtables all over the world, including in 30 countries as of today, many more to come. She also serves as a global fellow with the Wilson Center, which is a prestigious academic institution that's leading in various academic pursuits. Nadine has also served as the chair for the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is a part of the executive branch of our government that's dedicated to monitoring and responding to religious freedom around the world. Nadine was recently awarded the International Religious Freedom Impact Award and has served with various other government capacities being awarded for her hard work. Lastly, she's also received special awards for her work bridging the divide between Christian and Muslim communities. She received the Cedar of God Award by In Defense of Christians for her, quote, tireless work throughout her career for religious freedom for Christians both in the Middle East and globally, and by Justice for All, Advocacy for All, especially Muslims. She serves as the chair of the board for the Institute for Global Engagement and on the board of the Sinjar Academy and Freedom Research Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Nadine Maenza.
Wow, thank you for such a generous introduction. And Rachel, thank you to you and Bellwether International, Utah Global Diplomacy for the invitation to join you today. And also thanks to all of you for the warm welcome. You know, it's been so encouraging hearing about the beautiful community here and especially how welcoming you are to those from all ethnicities and religions. This really is the perfect setting to have these important conversations about how to bridge the religious divide both here domestically and globally. As you heard, I had the privilege to serve on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USERF, for 2 terms, ending my last year as chair. So USERF is an independent bipartisan government agency, but it has a mandate to assess religious freedom conditions independent of the U.S. government and make recommendations to the U.S. government, the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. And they put out a report each year making recommendations to the government. And in reviewing these reports over the last 5 years, it's clear that religious freedom conditions are deteriorating throughout the world. It continues to get worse. This past year, out of the 28 countries that they cover, only 3 countries showed tiny improvements. 11 stayed the same and 14 had deteriorating conditions. And on May 15th, I was honored to be able to join Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, as well as Ambassador for Religious Freedom Rashad Hussain at the State Department as they released their International Religious Freedom Report. And again, the theme of it was deteriorating conditions around the world. So after years of raising the profile of religious freedom, how are things still getting worse? So I'm going to take us a little bit of a journey and then I'll circle back. Have you ever heard about the letters from Abbottabad? These 17 declassified letters are from Osama bin Laden and other al-Qaeda operatives that they collected during the Abbottabad raid that took his life in May 2011. These are dated from 2006 through April 2011, right before he was killed. Bin Laden's public statements focused on those he said were the enemies of Muslims, especially corrupt, quote, apostates, Muslim rulers and their Western allies. Yet his real goal was to establish affiliates around the world that would focus and plan and orchestrate devastating attacks against the United States at home and abroad. He hoped this would also agitate public opinion and force the U.S. to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan. Instead, his al-Qaeda operatives took him at his word and decided to purge their own communities of what they considered, quote, infidels, religious minority communities, but really particularly Muslims who did not follow their distorted view of Islam. These poorly planned operations resulted in what bin Laden viewed as unnecessary deaths of Muslims, turning public opinion against him and al-Qaeda. In one strongly worded letter to the leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, bin Laden warned against expanding and declaring an Islamic State in Yemen. He urged him to refocus on attacking the United States and not the Yemeni government or security forces. The papers also talked about discussions they had to dissociate themselves from ISIS and al-Qaeda Iraq. They also came close to a direct and public confrontation with Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan. Bin Laden and al-Qaeda leaders expressed their displeasure over indiscriminate attacks against Muslims and threatened to take public measures, quote, unless we see from you serious and immediate practical and clear steps towards reforming your ways and disassociating yourself from vile mistakes that violate Islamic law. Don't misunderstand. Osama bin Laden was as bad as you think. His goal was to unite the world against the United States with mass casualties, duplicating 9/11 many times over. Instead, his affiliates went off course committing atrocities in their own communities, turning much of the Muslim world against him and al-Qaeda. Before his death, he was frantic in trying to change this. You can't control hate. Even Osama bin Laden could not control the hate that he had created. The strategy to divide and conquer, a strategy as old as time, can become an uncontrollable fire, as we have seen, when combined with hate based on religious identity, destroying all in its path. Political and religious leaders alike are using this strategy, and the results have been disastrous. In India, we see Hindu nationalists, in coordination with the BJP government, targeting the other, including Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and other religious and ethnic minorities. The hate speech and religiously discriminatory policies and the laws have led to violent attacks, including sexual violence against minorities with impunity. In Burma, we have Buddhist nationalists working with the military targeting the Rohingya Muslims in the Rakhine State with mass killings, rape, and other atrocities that forced over 700,000 within a few days to flee to Bangladesh in what would later be designated a genocide. The Burmese military, or Tatmadaw, continues to commit atrocities against Rohingya, Christians, and other religious and ethnic minorities, now even turning on faithful Buddhists who refuse to support their political goals. And in Pakistan, we are seeing Islamist groups using the excuse of religious discriminatory laws to target anyone outside the Sunni majority, including Ahmadiyas, Christians, and others with targeted killings, lynchings, mob violence, forced conversions, sexual violence against women and girls, desecration of houses of worship, and cemeteries. So in South Asia, just a snapshot of a part of the world, we have 3 different countries with 3 different majority religions, each partnering with the government to marginalize and persecute, quote, the other. Those outside the majority religion. Of course, there are many more examples I could share. I chose these because it's important to understand this is not about one religion, it's not about one region of the world. This is a global phenomenon, and it's very dangerous. While at USURF, I remember a memorable briefing to the commissioners by the U.S. Holocaust Museum's Early Warning Project. They informed us of that important moment when hate speech crosses the line. It's when those with power create the narrative that the other is a danger to their own existence and way of life. The Holocaust Museum indicated those countries I mentioned earlier, India, Pakistan, and Burma, all are listed as, quote, currently experiencing ongoing mass killings and at high risk on this for a much larger scale. So how do we possibly fight such evil? I believe the answer can be found in learning from places where there have been success. One of my favorite places to visit is in Raqqa, northeast Syria, the former capital of the ISIS Caliphate. It is now the headquarters of the Autonomous Administration in North and East Syria. This is a government that controls 1/3 of Syria that you've probably never heard of. So 1/3 of Syria actually has some stability. It's really the best religious freedom conditions in the Middle East, with half the leaders being women, the absolute opposite conditions they had under the ISIS Caliphate. While it's called a Kurdish government, it's actually incorrect. It's a majority Arab area now and actually overrepresents religious minorities in their government. So you will find a tapestry of religious minorities at every level of government. And really, where else in the region will you find Christian converts treated as equal members of society and their churches easily registered and celebrated? it was wonderful when I was there last, seeing the close friendship between a leading imam with a pastor of an evangelical church. Another bright spot we can learn from is Taiwan, this Mandarin-speaking island that embraces religious freedom and female leaders. They have overcome occupation by the Dutch and Japanese to develop one of the most robust democracies in the world. And while I was visiting a Catholic priest in Taipei in November, I witnessed his Buddhist nun friend pulling the church's weeds, tending to his garden. So both of these societies have moved beyond tolerance. See, we tolerate things we don't like. Instead, they accept one another even with their deep theological differences, and that's really the key. So one of the highlights of my time at USCIRF was really working with a diverse set of commissioners. USCIRF has 9 commissioners that oversee the agency that are chosen by the president and both the Democratic and Republican leaders of the House and the Senate. And so a very diverse group of people. In fact, there's a really sweet story in the New York Times that you could Google just last year about the friendship between Commissioners Tony Perkins, the president of the Family Research Council, and Arima Bhargava, who is a former George Soros Fellow. You could not find 2 people more different politically. And their friendship really represented the commission well, because we were able to work together and form these meaningful friendships, even with this deep theological differences and political divide. And again, it's really the key. We were unified in our support of Article 18, as you just heard about, such a foundation for all of the work we do internationally, because we don't internationally go and use the U.S. Constitution. We use Article 18. That's the standard. Let me read this to you. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. I was so surprised that almost all of you are familiar with Article 18. That's very encouraging. And of course, freedom of religion or belief must include non-believers as well. All have the right to believe or not to believe. The difference really comes in how to ensure these rights. So USCIRF and others have an important role in documenting religious freedom violations globally. What they do is necessary, but it is not sufficient. While at USCIRF, I worked closely with the State Department, foreign governments, embassies. While I learned the importance of government, I also better understood the importance of civil society. Both USCIRF and the State Department rely heavily on civil society for information that helps inform their reports and policy recommendations. Even during our USCIRF official delegations to a lot of fascinating countries, it really, when you looked back at them, the highlight of the trip was meeting with those civil society leaders on the ground, telling you what was actually happening, and the ones doing the real work. And so that's, and when I consider those rare countries where we actually saw real improvements, civil society was on the ground doing instrumental work, both local groups alongside, sometimes experts come alongside to support them, but so important that everything is locally owned, locally run. It's the only way for any sustainable change in these countries. So that is why I chose to join Greg Mitchell at the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, and thank you for that beautiful introduction, after I left USCIRF last May. So we build civil society infrastructure to support the religious freedom movement globally. We convene the IRF Roundtable, as you heard, in Washington, D.C., and in over 30 countries globally. And we are also launching IRF secretariats in different regions around the world to help organize and support the work. For instance, in September, we are launching the South Asia Secretariat based in Taiwan. In November, we are launching the Central European Secretariat based in Prague. We are also running a global series of summits to catalyze the establishment of secretariats and locally owned, locally run roundtables. And we're excited to be hosting an in-person religious freedom roundtable in Florida in July, our first domestically that we have done. And next week, we'll be hosting a special in-person roundtable in Washington, D.C. on the religious freedom conditions in India, as the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, is doing a state trip to the United States next week. So of course we need organizations and individuals documenting atrocities and making sure the world cannot look away at those horrific crimes occurring with impunity. I've personally been sanctioned by the Chinese government for calling out their atrocities, along with 3 of my colleagues while at USCIRF. That was interesting. They said that I had interfered with the inner workings of the Chinese government. Wasn't sure how that happened. But really, I also had lied about the 3 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in Xinjiang, China, which of course isn't a lie. It's horrific. And these are breaking crimes that we cannot look away from and we cannot ignore. I've also been a loud voice calling out the horrible atrocities against religious minorities in India, as well as in the areas Turkey has invaded in northeast Syria, where their Islamist militias have created societies similar to those the ISIS caliphate had created. It's critical the truth is told and those who perpetrated these crimes are held accountable. But we also need civil society working in cooperation, or cooperative engagement, we call it, with governments, which has been some of the most important work I have done. Since it is hard to see discussions happening behind closed doors, it can be easy to misunderstand this engagement as whitewashing these governments' crimes and using religious freedom as an excuse to be close with powerful governments. But obviously, if somebody is paid to promote these type of governments, that is something completely different and shouldn't be accepted. It is disappointing to see former members of Congress and officials doing just that. But don't confuse the two. Cooperative engagement with the government is hard. I can recall a few extremely difficult conversations sitting with a powerful government leader, getting ready to tell them something I knew they did not want to hear. It really frightening. And it must be done carefully. While I've been a part of successfully negotiating an unjust the release of an unjustly held prisoner, I've also made the mistake that led to a prisoner being put in solitary confinement, a really low point for me personally. So we need civil society to document religious freedom violations and organize advocacy campaigns. We need those working on the ground with the grassroots and religious communities, and also those working with governments to help them move towards religious freedom. And we need to respect those with different roles, as all are necessary to make real progress. While I was in Taiwan last year, a reporter asked me why we would be having Religious Freedom Summit and a roundtable in Taiwan, a country that already had excellent religious freedom conditions. Some might ask the same of you here in Utah, since your conditions here are so much better than so many other communities. My answer is this: you must safeguard religious freedom conditions for your community and your children. The next generation may not understand the value of what you have unless you have done the work to educate them. In addition, it only takes one dangerous issue or leader to divide the community, which is much harder to do if you've already done the work ahead of time. Last night, I heard a little bit about what's going on here in Utah in legislative challenges you've had lately, making it clear that no community is immune. I have no doubt that you guys will rise to the occasion, like this important work you're doing here at the symposium and having these important conversations. We are fortunate to have many organizations and individuals doing great work around the world, including many here in Utah. Among the most skillful is Elizabeth Clark here at BYU International Center for Law and Religion Studies, who you will be fortunate to hear from later today. Her legal advice and guidance have been critical for governments reforming laws and that impact religious freedom. Bob Roberts and Multi-Faith Neighbors are doing astounding work to build trust among religious leaders and government leaders as well. The Institute for Global Engagement and Love Your Neighbor are working on the ground to rise up government leaders to impact society and prepare grassroots for changing laws and norms, while also working in cooperative engagement with governments. We are fortunate to have many excellent civil society organizations doing the real work in the U.S. and abroad. I've been encouraged hearing how many here in Utah, as of course, from the Global Diplomacy Center, is that right? Really impressive work as well. I'm also encouraged by the continued growth of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance. It's called IRFBA. This is a positive force in the movement for religious freedom. IRFBA is an alliance of over 37 countries, and I think a few have just joined, fully committed to Article 18 in advancing religious freedom around the world. While it was started by the United States and chaired by the United States for several years, it has moved, and the current chair is Fiona Bruce, the United Kingdom envoy for religious freedom. And soon it will move to be chaired by Robert Rehak. He's the ambassador for special envoy for Holocaust, interfaith dialogue, and freedom of religion or belief in the Czech Republic. It's wonderful to see the leadership move between countries and more governments step up to take leadership in support of religious freedom. IRFBA also organized the annual ministerial to advance religious freedom or belief that will be held this year in the Czech Republic, where they bring together foreign ministers from all their countries to raise religious freedom and do some coordinated actions together. And we at their Secretariat are working closely with them to get that organized and see how civil society can come along and support these governments. So the work we are doing is not about becoming more secular and abandoning our beliefs so we can work together, but rather bringing our whole selves including our deepest held beliefs, respecting the dignity of each other while acknowledging those differences. So I'm heartened by all of you at the symposium today, especially so many of you that focus on this important work. And I'm looking forward to the panels and the conversation we will have. So these kind of conversations is how we move forward to bridge the religious divide and work towards building societies where we accept one another, both here in the United States and abroad. So thanks again for the warm welcome, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the day.